This week on Myth, you'll learn why tits are a literal booby trap, why desecrating your mother's corpse is a good idea, and why helping out Zeus is a terrible fucking idea. This is the Myths Your Teacher Hated podcast, where I tell the stories of cultures from around the world in all of their original, bloody, uncensored glory. Modern tellings of these stories have become dry and dusty, but I'll be trying to breathe new life into them. This is episode 1B, Pandora's Vagina. In episode 1A, we saw the creation of the universe, the rule of the Titans, and the overthrow of the Titans by the Olympians, who are the Greek gods we all know and love. If this is your first time listening to this podcast, I'd recommend going back and checking out the first part of the episode, but this week's story stands mostly on its own, so it's up to you. As always, this episode is not safe for work. What with most of creation having already been locked up in Tartarus, or guarding those assholes locked up in Tartarus, the Earth was pretty barren, but at least the monsters were gone now. Fuck those guys. Zeus decided to populate the Earth, and the accounts as to how that happened differ. I've picked my favorite. Zeus gave the job of creating all creatures to his faithful titan, Epimetheus. His name means afterthought, so you can guess how this goes. We all have that friend who just does whatever comes into their empty fucking brain and doesn't stop to think about the consequences until they're already sitting in the cooling ashes of what used to be your house with an empty fifth of whiskey and a shit-eating grin. Epimetheus is no different. He gets excited making the animals and proceeds to give out all of the fur, claws, scales, wings, and so on. The creation of the platypus may have involved some heavy drinking. It comes time to make people, but he's fresh out of cool shit. So if you've ever wished you could have wings, this is the fucker you can blame for that. He runs to his brother and begs for help. Prometheus, whose name means forethought, was super wise, possibly the wisest being in all of creation. Definitely smarter than Zeus. He agrees to help. He decides to have people stand on 2 legs facing the heavens, instead of on 4 legs facing the earth, like all of the animals. I mean, not like monkeys, but the Greeks didn't know about fucking monkeys. Even so, they're still cold and hungry because they don't have fur to stay warm, or claws to kill things to eat, so basically, they're just standing around being fucked by nature. He takes pity on his starving, shivering creation. He sees the fire of the sun up on Mount Olympus. Zeus has decreed that fire is for the gods only, but Prometheus decides, fuck it. He takes a branch and brings fire back to the miserable fuckers on Earth. They're able to use it to warm themselves, drive off the night, and protect themselves from all of the most dangerous shit that makes us afraid of the dark to this day. They also learn to make tools, weapons, crafts, and basically all of civilization. Humanity is a quick learner in this story. As an aside, there's another major account of man's creation in Greek myth that some writers have merged into one story. Doing that feels unwieldy and awkward, so I'll just tell them briefly and let you know where they fit in with the story so far. The first story has the Titans creating man themselves. They create men out of gold. They were mortals, but otherwise, it was basically the Garden of Eden. Not the last parallel to the Bible stories you'll see in this podcast. With the earth providing the food without toil, and the men existing without pain or sorrow. The gods loved them, and when they died, they became angels who wandered around helping out mankind. Hesiod puts the golden races existing at the same time that Cronus was ruling, and has them destroyed during the Titanomachy. It's not explained why the gods started experimenting with different metals, but I have a theory. If you've ever had 24 karat gold, you know it is fragile as fuck. You can bend it and gouge it pretty easily, so the gold men must have been pretty goddamned breakable. It's the only reason I can think of for what keeps happening next. After the golden race, the Olympians tried building men out of silver. In short, they sucked compared to the gold men. The Olympians seemed to have trouble getting the hang of what the Titans had been doing. The Silvermen were so stupid that they required 100 years to grow up, but then lived very short lives. They were too stupid to obey the gods. I say stupid because the gods themselves were telling the Silvermen what to do, not in some vague, I inspired a book but it's totally me guys have faith kind of way, but by literally walking out the earth, slapping people in the face, and telling them to shape up or be destroyed. They didn't, and Zeus destroyed them in fury. When they died, their spirits went to Hades and dwelled there. Next up was the brass race. They were immensely strong and Quentin Tarantino level violent. Historically, brass weapons were the first to allow for widespread warfare, being incredibly superior to arrows and spears of tribes who did not have the ability to make brass. Go Prometheus for giving people fire, right? They had brass weapons, brass armor, and, for some reason, brass houses. They worshipped Ares, the god of war, and instead of bread, ate the hearts of their fellow men. They fight each other to the death and are gone. All of them. Their spirits are sent to a dark pit in the underworld, never to see the light of day again. Some accounts have Zeus ending the brazen men with a great flood, but that's used again later, so I'll just say he rained death from above in the form of a hail of lightning bolts, because he loved to do that shit. Next, the gods hit pause on the whole metal men thing and created a race of noble heroes. Why they didn't start with that, who the fuck knows. The heroic age is when most of these stories take place. A lot of the heroes had divine qualities, or were half deity. Often Zeus, because that dude got around, but we'll get to that in a later story. They were noble and respected the gods, and most died in valiant quests or noble wars, like the Trojan War and the Seven against Thebes, both of which will be covered in later episodes. Their souls went to the Elysian fields in Hades after they died, which was very similar to heaven. Also called the Island of the Blessed, it was a place where souls could live in peace and happiness in the same station they enjoyed in life. So if you've ever had that dream of heaven where you get to sit around playing Xbox all day, this is for you. Cronus is eventually freed from Tartarus, where most of the Titans were banished, and becomes ruler of the Elysian fields. Once the Age of Myth ends, the gods create the race of Iron Men. It is described as a time of constant stress and labor, sort of like man after he was kicked out of Eden, right? Morality is gone, and men are constantly opposing each other, lying to each other, betraying each other, yada yada yada. One day, they will become evil enough that Zeus will destroy us like he did the other races that displeased him. Another version has the gods creating men as, essentially, two people put together. There are three races: the children of the sun, the children of the moon, and the children of the earth. All of them had 4 hands and feet, 2 faces, and 1 body. The children of the sun were both men, like Uranus. The children of the earth were both women, like Gaia. And the children of the moon were 1 man and 1 woman, being in between the two. They were incredibly strong and coordinated, and they worked very well together. They start to wonder if they need the gods. And the gods get scared, because these guys, really fucking work together well. The gods talk about killing them, like they did the giants, but the gods also like the sacrifices and prayers, and want that shit to keep happening, so they come up with a plan. Zeus flings thunderbolts down and splits them in 2, each with 2 hands, 2 feet, and 1 head. The 2 halves run to each other and fling their arms around one another, trying to press themselves back together to become one again. They begin to die off from starvation and neglect, because they won't do anything apart, and have trouble doing things together now that they're separate beings. He takes pity on them, or, more likely, doesn't want the adulation to stop, and comes up with a new plan. Their parts are turned around to face the front. He changes the way they procreate, so that instead of sowing their seed in the dirt like grasshoppers, the ancient Greeks didn't do well in science class apparently, but inside of one another, the way you and I both know and love. This way, they can embrace and procreate the species, for the children of the moon at least, or embrace for mutual comfort, by which I mean fucking for fun, and go on about their lives. To this day, we are but half people, always looking for other half, the gender that is missing being dependent on whether we are children of the sun, the moon, or the earth. This version shows up in Plato's Symposium, and also as a rad song in Hedwig and the Angry Inch called The Origin of Love. Check it out. So back to the original story, after a very long aside, and I'm really sorry about that, but it was really fascinating shit. Prometheus had stolen fire from the gods and given it to man, which was expressly forbidden because, as we've seen, Zeus was really scared of being overthrown like his father before him, and his father before him, so maybe he had good reason. He sees the fires dotting the Earth's surface, and figures out what must have happened. Surely there's no way that a stray thunderbolt could possibly have started a fire. No, it must be someone's fault. And he is pissed. He's already mad at Prometheus for liking people too much, and because he had tricked the gods into giving men the best parts of the animal sacrifices. Back when they were first deciding how sacrifices would work, he had cut up a great ox, and took all of the edible parts and wrapped it in the hide, then buried it under the entrails. Then he took the bones and put them together cunningly and shined it with fat to look enticing. He was really clever because I don't see how that shit would have worked. Prometheus then asks Zeus to pick between the 2 piles for which parts the god would receive. Being way dumber than Prometheus, he totally picks the shining fat. He gets angry when he realizes that he's been tricked and men get the good parts of the animal, but he made his choice, and in spite of murder-killing all sorts of powerful entities to get his way, decides that he has to abide by the completely arbitrary choice for some reason. He decides to punish everyone involved, though. He has Hephaestus, the god of the forge, make massive, unbreakable chains, and uses them to chain Prometheus naked to the top of a mountain with the help of his servants, force and violence. Seriously, those are Zeus's servants. After a few days of torture on top of the mountain, Zeus sends Hermes, messenger of the gods, to talk to him. It turns out that Prometheus knows a prophecy that Zeus would one day have a son that would overthrow him and take his place. If Prometheus would just tell him who the mother would be, so he could make sure not to bone her, he'd be free. Now, Zeus could totally just stop tricking mortals into fucking him, but Zeus would literally rather die than stop raping mortal women. Prometheus tells him he'd have an easier time convincing the waves not to break on the shore, so fuck off, which is pretty badass. In my head, his voice of that of Morgan Freeman, but maybe that's just me. Hermes warns Prometheus that it can get way worse than just being chained naked to a rock on top of a freezing mountain and forbidden to sleep. A giant eagle is going to come every day and eat out his liver, leaving him awake and alive through the whole fucking thing. Being immortal, it will painfully grow back the next day, just in time for the eagle to come back and do it all over again. He warns that the man who can free him has not been born, but we'll get to that, I promise. And for generations, this happens every goddamn day. Meanwhile, Zeus creates a trap for man and for Epimetheus. I'm warning you now, this next part is either sexist or super sexist, depending on which version you use. I'll pick the least sexist, but still kind of sexist one, but I'll briefly describe the others too. At this point in creation, leaving aside the non-canonical origin of love story, only men had existed, created by the gods directly. Zeus creates a woman named Pandora, which means gift of all, and each of the gods gives her a gift, and sends her to Epimetheus to be his wife. Now before he was taken away, Prometheus had explicitly warned his brother not to accept any gifts from Zeus because they would be poisoned, because seriously, he's chaining me naked to a rock, he's not a good guy. Epimetheus agrees, and then forgets completely about it. So when this beautiful woman shows up at his door from Zeus, he takes her in. Given the scarcity of females in the pantheon, and all of the titans being locked away or dead, he was probably a really old virgin, so maybe we can forgive him for deciding that the juice was worth the squeeze. Besides, she was really cool and sweet and funny and charming, and he really, really liked her. Pandora comes to live with him, and he's stoked. He tells her that everything he has is hers, and she can do whatever she likes, except don't open that one box. See, there's a box in the corner of the house. It's plain and cheap looking, and closed with a clasp, but not a lock. Because he's the afterthought brother, he decides this vague statement is a perfectly fine way to leave things and goes about his business. They were incredibly happy together. Except for the box. See, back when she was first being created, each of the gods and goddesses gave Pandora a gift. Zeus's gift to her was curiosity, which on the one hand is the beginning of wisdom, and on the other hand, killed the fucking cat. After some time, she can't stand it anymore, and she opens the box. Inside, she sees some truly nasty shit, and it all rushes out toward her face. She screams and falls back. She gets back up and slams the lid shut, but only one thing was trapped. Epimetheus comes home to find her crying and asks what happened. She tells him, "I opened the box," and he's crestfallen. The box was full of all the things left over from creation that they didn't want let out in the world. These were the things like disease, pain, envy, greed, you get the idea, bad shit. Epimetheus checks the box and sees that the only thing that didn't get out was hope, which, until all the bad shit got out, man didn't need. He places that into mankind to help them deal with his mistake, because seriously, if he had just told her what was in the box, none of this would have happened. I mean, would you open a box full of all sorts of terrible things? Of course, that's why Zeus pulled this with Epimetheus and had his brother chained naked to a rock. Prometheus would have seen it coming, and had, in fact, already seen it and warned him about it. The slightly more sexist version is the same, except that the box is Pandora's. Zeus gave it to Pandora when he created her as his gift and warned her to never ever open it. She, being a woman, and therefore weak-willed and nosy, ignores the king of the gods as he knew she would, because she's a woman, rather than because Zeus is vague and mysterious, and anyone would be curious. If the king of the gods tells you don't open the box, don't open the damn box. The super sexist version has Zeus creating his beautiful disaster and giving it to men who become enraptured of her and fight over her. She is the bane of all men, and from her come all women, who are, and I'm quoting here, an evil to men with a nature to do evil. Fuck that shit. This story bears a lot of similarities to the Adam and Eve story, right down to women tricking men into evil ways because of her womanly curiosity. So basically, I guess the moral is that men are terrible, but prefer to blame someone else for their problems, and women, being not in power because of the patriarchy, were an easy target. Once man had fire, he, as usual, decided to be an asshole with it. Mankind became wicked and decadent, to the point that Zeus finally had enough of everyone and decided to just kill them all and be fucking done with it. He got his brother Poseidon, god of the sea, to help, and sent a flood down to drown the world. Sound familiar? A torrent poured from the sky, and the seas rose up from the beaches and drowned out all but the highest mountain on earth, Mount Parnassus. After flooding for 9 days and nights straight, a small wooden box floated to the tiny peak that remained dry. Well, dry-ish. Out of the box came 2 people, a husband and a wife named Deucalion and Pyrrha. Deucalion was Prometheus' son, and Pyrrha was the daughter of Epimetheus and Pandora. So they were cousins, which is just how the ancient Greeks did things. Prometheus had given a warning before being carried away to his rock, where he endured and survived the flood, despite being buried beneath it, to build a watertight chest and stock it with provisions. Unlike Epimetheus, they fucking listened. Fortunately, Zeus was impressed by their cleverness rather than killing them out of hand as he easily could have done. It didn't hurt that he knew them as pious, faithful servants of the gods, unusual in the wicked times they lived in. They looked around and saw barren earth with no life upon it. Zeus took pity on them and drained off the flood. To where exactly is unclear, leaving them free to descend to the swampy, disgusting ground again. They find a temple, covered in slime and seaweed and debris. Think Call of Cthulhu, if you know it. If you don't know it, read it. It's fucking incredible. They go inside to offer thanks for their survival and ask for guidance as to what to do, since they were literally the entire planet. A voice rang out in the stillness and told them, "Cover your heads and throw the bones of your mother behind you." Pyrrha said, "Fuck me, really? Well, we can't do that. First, there's no telling if her grave even survived the goddamn flood, and besides, that's super gross and fucking disrespectful to the dead." Deucalion agreed that it was bullshit, but figured that there had to be another explanation. I mean, when a voice appears out of nowhere when you are literally the only beings on Earth, there's got to be a good reason. Surely the gods wouldn't demand blasphemy, right? They eventually decided that the Earth was the mother of all life, and the rocks could be considered to be her bones, so maybe they should just throw rocks over their shoulder. Pyrrha said that that was a stupid fucking idea. Deucalion said, "Yeah, it probably is, but do you have a better idea? If it doesn't work, we still have time to go find and desecrate a corpse." So they did. Throw rocks, not desecrate a corpse. As the stones landed on the muddy ground, they rose up and became people. They were known as the stone race, and they were hardy and tough, which the Greeks obviously thought they were, since this was believed to be the current race of people on Earth. And with that being the closest thing to a happy ending that we're going to get in this story, it's time for Gods and Monsters. This is the segment where I get into a little more detail about the personalities and histories of one of the gods or monsters from this week's pantheon that was not discussed in the main story. This week's monster is the demigoddess and total badass Empousa. Picture this. You're a dashing young Athenian out partying one night. You've been drinking straight wine all night. As an aside, most people drank wine heavily cut with water unless they're trying to get fucked up. Since the water was pretty disgusting, the alcohol in the wine helped kill off the bacteria that they totally didn't know existed, and made it a lot safer to drink. All they really knew is that if you drank straight water, you fucking died. If you drank watered wine, you did okay. You met a smoking hot redhead in the inn common room, and she's been buying your drinks for the last hour. Even better, when the place closes up, she tells you that she has a little room upstairs, with a bed big enough for 2, though you might have to squeeze a little. You have the best fuck of your life and fall asleep. A little later, you feel warm, then hot, then a searing pain in your neck. Your eyes shoot open, and you see something that might once have been the woman you came upstairs with, but which is warped into a monster. Her hair is now made of literal fire, and bat wings have grown out of her back. Her skin has gone from pale to alabaster white, and her eyes have gone blood red. Her fingers have been replaced with talons, and her teeth with razor-sharp fangs. You're not sure if it's the mortal terror or the massive blood loss, but you think she now has one donkey leg and one bronze one. With her razor-sharp fangs, she begins tearing out your throat. You can feel her feeding on you as you breathe your last. This is Empousa. In early stories, she is an evil daughter of the goddess Hecate and the spirit Mormo. She feasted on blood and flesh by seducing young men and then devouring them while they slept. In one story, she attacks a young man she found sleeping at a crossroads. Unfortunately for her, the young man turned out to be Zeus in disguise on the prowl for a hot young fuck. Since she attacked him instead of fucking him, he promptly kills her. In other stories, the Empousa are monstrous creations of Hecate, set to guard crossroads and attack unsuspecting travelers at night. In another story, told in Aristophanes' Frogs, and, oddly enough, retold in the Percy Jackson and the Olympian series, the Empousa are said to be one of the evils unleashed by Persephone when she opened her box. The monster version was said to have been created by dark magics of Hecate to combine humans, donkeys, and bronze. And no, I don't know how that combination develops bat wings, fire hair, or bloodlust, but myths and logic are not always good friends. The Empousa was said to have one donkey leg and one bronze prosthetic leg, because when making the terrifying forebear of the vampire, why not make it completely ridiculous? So be warned, if you meet a strange, beautiful woman at a crossroads at night, and she offers you the sins of the flesh, check her legs and make sure she doesn't have a donkey leg and a bronze leg. If she does though, you're in luck. All you have to do is break out of the seductive spell she can weave with her eyes, and insult her. Keeping with this week's theme of the ancient Greeks were sexist, the deadly Empousa are apparently very insecure about their weird legs and will run away shrieking if you say something mean to them about it. Bram Stoker used these creatures as one of the influences on Dracula, but, understandably, he removed some of the more outlandish elements to make his vampire more terrifying. That's it for this episode of Myths Your Teacher Hated. Keep up with new episodes on our Facebook page, on iTunes, on Stitcher, or on TuneIn. Or you can follow us on Twitter as @HardcoreMyth. You can also find news and episodes on our website at mythsyourteacherhated.com. If you like what you've heard, I'd appreciate a review on iTunes, since it helps increase the show's standing and lets more people know that it exists. If you have any questions, any gods or monsters you'd want to learn about, or any ideas for future stories that you'd like to hear, feel free to drop me a line. I'm trying to pull as much material as I can from as many different cultures as possible, but there are all sorts of stories that I've never heard, so suggestions are appreciated. The theme music is by Tiny Cheese Puff, whom you can find on Fiverr.com. In the next episode, we'll leave the Greeks behind and tell a story about one of my favorite trickster gods, Anansi. He's a demigod from West African mythology, and he's both a wisecracking jokester and an incredibly self-absorbed asshole. You'll learn how Zeus isn't the only douchebag sky god, why you should never accept help from a spider, and that invisible fairies get really bitchy if you aren't polite to them. That's all for now. Thanks for listening.